I'm Madison Reynolds, 28, and last Thanksgiving changed my life forever. For years I'd endured my mother's cutting remarks and impossible standards in her picture-perfect Boston home. This time was different, though. I brought Brandon, my firefighter boyfriend, to meet the family. When I announced our plans to move in together, my mother's perfectly manicured finger pointed straight at me as she declared, "You don't deserve a seat at this table if you're going to throw away your potential on this lifestyle." Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family dynamic. Growing up in Wellesley, an affluent Boston suburb, our family looked flawless from the outside. My mother, Catherine Reynolds, 54, built her interior design business catering to Boston's elite, while my father, Richard, 56, worked as a cardiac surgeon at Massachusetts General. My older sister, Jessica, 32, followed the expected path to Harvard Law School and now works at a prestigious firm downtown. My younger brother, Michael, 24, is currently in medical school, following in our father's footsteps. Our colonial-style home with its manicured gardens and designer furniture served as the perfect backdrop for my mother's obsession with appearances. Every Christmas card featured us in coordinating outfits, smiling as though we were the happiest family in New England. But behind that facade lay a household ruled by my mother's impossible standards and my father's emotional absence. As the middle child, I struggled to find my place. Jessica was the golden child, brilliant, obedient, and eager to please. She checked every box my mother created: valedictorian, Ivy League, and marriage to Thomas, an investment banker from an equally prestigious family. Michael, being the baby and only boy, could do no wrong. His teenage rebellions were dismissed as boys being boys, and his occasional academic struggles met with tutors rather than criticism. I, however, could never quite measure up. If I brought home an M, my mother would ask why it wasn't an A+. When I made the varsity volleyball team, she questioned why I wasn't team captain. My room was never tidy enough, my hair never quite right, my achievements never quite sufficient. "Madison, do you really think that outfit is appropriate?" she'd ask at breakfast. Jessica was already applying to internships at your age, she'd comment when I mentioned weekend plans with friends. The summer before college, I expressed interest in studying marketing. My mother's response was immediate and cutting. "Marketing, that's for people who couldn't get into law school," she said, sipping her morning coffee. "You have the Reynolds name to uphold." Despite her disapproval, I pursued my passion at Boston University. Throughout college, I worked harder than anyone I knew, taking on unpaid internships while maintaining a near-perfect paw. After graduation, I secured a position at a respected digital marketing agency, steadily working my way up over the past 6 years. Last month, I was promoted to marketing director, overseeing a team of 12 in several major accounts. When I called my father to share the news, his response was typical, "That's nice, Madison," before quickly mentioning he had surgery in 20 minutes. When I told Jessica, she congratulated me but quickly pivoted to her recent courtroom victory. I didn't even bother telling my mother directly. I decided to save the news for Thanksgiving dinner, foolishly hoping that announcing it in person might finally earn her approval. Every family gathering followed the same script. My mother would criticize my life choices while praising Jessica's. My father would retreat to his study or find something to fix around the house. Jessica would not so subtly mention her accomplishments, and Michael would arrive late, offer a charming excuse, and face zero consequences. Through years of this treatment, I developed a reflexive need to justify my existence at the family table. I'd come prepared with achievements to report, defensiveness at the ready. I learned to swallow hurt, to smile through criticism, to pretend her words didn't cut deep. I became adept at the Reynolds family dance: show up, perform, retreat with wounds no one could see. But something had changed in me over the past year. For the first time in my life, I had built something that felt real and solid, a career I was proud of, a relationship based on mutual respect, and slowly a sense of self-worth that existed independent of my mother's approval. I still wanted it, craved it in some deep childlike part of myself, but I was beginning to understand I might never receive it. I had mentioned this revelation during a phone call with Michael last month. "You know Mom will never change, right?" he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I know," I replied, "but this promotion is objectively impressive. Maybe this time." Michael sighed. "Just don't get your hopes up, Mads, and if you're bringing Brandon, prepare him. You know how she gets about anyone who isn't on her approved career list." I did know, and still, like Charlie Brown with the football, I kept coming back, hoping this time would be different. I met Brandon Wilson at a charity gala benefiting the Boston Fire Department 6 months ago. I was there representing my agency, which had donated marketing services. He was being honored for rescuing a family from a 3-alarm fire in Dorchester. While the other firefighters worked the room in their dress uniforms, Brandon stood somewhat awkwardly by the hors d'oeuvres table, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Not a fan of these events? Asked, grabbing a stuffed mushroom. He smiled, revealing a slight dimple in his left cheek. That obvious, huh? I'm more comfortable running into burning buildings than making small talk in a penguin suit. There was something immediately disarming about Brandon. At 30, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to prove. His sandy brown hair was cut short, his handshake firm, his blue eyes direct but kind. When he spoke about his work, it wasn't with the self-importance I'd grown accustomed to in my parents' social circle, but with genuine passion and humility. Over drinks, I learned he'd grown up in a small town in western Massachusetts, the son of a high school English teacher and a carpenter. He'd decided to become a firefighter after losing his childhood best friend in a house fire when they were 16. Instead of being consumed by tragedy, he'd channeled it into purpose. I couldn't save Jake, he said quietly, but maybe I could save someone else's Jake someday. By the end of the evening, we'd exchanged numbers. Our first date was nothing fancy, just coffee at a small cafe near the Boston Common. One coffee turned into a walk through the park, which turned into dinner, which turned into 6 months of the most honest relationship I'd ever experienced. Brandon's authenticity was like oxygen after years of breathing the rarefied, artificial air of my family's expectations. He listened when I talked about work, asked questions, celebrated my successes without making them about him. When I confided my complicated family dynamics, he didn't judge or offer simplistic advice. He just held my hand and said, "They're missing out on knowing the real you. That's their loss." In his small apartment in Somerville, decorated with second-hand furniture and photos of his tight-knit family, I felt more at home than I ever had in my mother's showcase house. When he invited me to Sunday dinners with his parents, Linda and Robert, I witnessed a family that teased and disagreed but fundamentally respected each other. They asked questions and actually listened to the answers. They laughed, real, uninhibited laughter that my mother would have deemed excessive. 3 months into dating, Brandon was called to a dangerous warehouse fire. I spent the night pacing my apartment, checking news updates and fighting panic. When he finally called at 6 a.m., voice hoarse from smoke but very much alive, something shifted in me. Life was too short for half-hearted relationships, too precious to waste on people who couldn't appreciate what was right in front of them. "I love you," I blurted out, surprising myself. A pause, then his exhausted chuckle. "I was planning to say that first, under more romantic circumstances. But I love you too, Madison. Have for weeks now." 2 months later, we decided to move in together. We found a 2-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, not as upscale as my mother would expect, but charming, with hardwood floors and big windows that let in morning light. Together we painted walls, assembled IKEA furniture, and blended our lives. For the first time, I was building something that was entirely my choice. As Thanksgiving approached, Brandon suggested it was time to meet my family. "They're an important part of your life," he said, "and I want to know all of you." The anxiety that washed over me must have shown on my face. "Hey," he said gently, taking my hands. "I know it won't be easy, but we'll face it together." We spent weeks preparing. I briefed him on my mother's likely interrogation topics, my father's emotional distance, Jessica's competitive nature. Brandon listened attentively, occasionally asking questions but never judging. "What if she's horrible to you?" I asked one night as we lay in bed. "My mother can be brutal when she decides someone doesn't meet her standards." Brandon pulled me closer. "Then I'll be polite but firm. I'm not there for her approval, Madison. I'm there because I love you." The night before Thanksgiving, as we packed overnight bags for the drive to Wellesley, Brandon brought up something I'd been avoiding. "You know there's a class thing happening here too, right?" he said. "Your family might look down on me not just because I'm a firefighter, but because I come from working-class people." I nodded, my throat tight. "My mother is the worst kind of snob. Old money married to new success. Nothing is ever enough." "Then we need to be clear on something," Brandon said, his expression serious. "I'm proud of what I do and where I come from. I won't pretend to be something I'm not to make your mother comfortable." "I would never ask you to," I said, realizing I meant it for the first time. I was bringing someone to the Reynolds table who represented my choices, not my mother's. The drive to my parents' house the next morning was tense. Brandon, wearing a blue button-down shirt and his nicest slacks, kept squeezing my hand reassuringly at red lights. I'd warned him repeatedly about my mother's judgmental nature, how she would evaluate everything from his table manners to his knowledge of wine. "She'll try to make you feel small," I said as we turned onto the maple-lined street of my childhood. "It's what she does." Brandon nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I can handle it, and if it gets too bad, we can always leave. The idea of actually leaving a family gathering early, of having that option, was revolutionary to me. As we pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' colonial home, Brandon leaned over and kissed me softly. "Remember, I'm right beside you. Whatever happens in there doesn't change us." With those words echoing in my mind, I stepped out of the car and approached the house where I'd never quite belonged, with the first person who made me feel I didn't have to earn my place in the world. My mother's house looked like it had been staged for an Architectural Digest holiday special. A harvest wreath adorned the glossy black door, and through the windows I could see the warm glow of her carefully curated lighting design. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell, feeling Brandon's reassuring presence behind me. Mom opened the door herself, dressed impeccably in a cashmere sweater and pearl earrings, her blonde bob not a hair out of place. Her smile was practiced as she air-kissed my cheek. "Madison, darling, you're looking." Her eyes flickered over my burgundy dress. Well, this was her favorite technique, the compliment that wasn't quite a compliment, designed to plant a seed of insecurity. Before I could respond, she turned her attention to Brandon, her gaze clinical and assessing. "And you must be Brandon. We've heard so little about you." Another barb, this one directed at me for not sharing enough details about my relationship. Brandon extended his hand, unfazed. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Reynolds. Thank you for including me in your Thanksgiving celebration." She took his hand briefly. "Catherine, please, we're all adults here." Her tone suggested the jury was still out on that assessment. As we stepped into the foyer, my father emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose, distracted as always. He gave me a brief hug, then offered Brandon a handshake that was efficient rather than warm. "Good to meet you, son. Madison mentioned you're in civil service." Before Brandon could elaborate on his career, my father's attention was diverted by the sound of a football game from the living room. "Well, make yourselves comfortable. Dinner's at 4. With that he retreated, leaving us with my mother, who guided us toward the formal living room where pre-dinner drinks were being served. Jessica and her husband Thomas were already there, Jessica in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, Thomas in a blazer and loafers that screamed old money. "Madison," Jessica exclaimed, embracing me with more enthusiasm than usual, perhaps compensating for the awkwardness to come. "And you must be Brandon. I've been dying to meet the man who's finally convinced my sister to settle down." Thomas offered a stiff handshake and immediately launched into questions about Brandon's career. "Firefighting, that must be exciting. Were you ever interested in pursuing something in the private sector? Risk management, perhaps? I know several firms that value that kind of hands-on experience." The implication was clear. Surely firefighting was just a stepping stone to something more ambitious, more lucrative, more worthy of the Reynolds connection. Brandon answered smoothly, "I've found my calling. 15 years in, and I still feel privileged to do this work every day." Thomas looked momentarily perplexed, as if he'd encountered a strange new species. Before he could respond, the front door banged open, and Michael bounded in, 40 minutes late, bringing a gust of cold air and chaotic energy. Sorry, he called out, dropping his overnight bag in the foyer. Study group ran long, and then traffic was a nightmare. He swooped into the living room, giving me an enthusiastic hug. "Mads, looking good, sis." He turned to Brandon with a genuine smile. "You must be the firefighter, Michael Reynolds. The family screw-up, Michael," my mother admonished, but without the edge her voice would have carried had I been the late one. "What, just getting the introductions out of the way?" Michael grinned, accepting the scotch my father had poured him. As we moved to the sitting area, my mother began her subtle interrogation of Brandon. Where had he gone to school? Western Massachusetts State University, not an Ivy League. Did his parents still live in that small town? Yes, happily for 35 years. Had he considered graduate school? He's taken some courses in fire science and emergency management, but his passion was in the field. With each answer I could see her mentally checking boxes, none of them in Brandon's favor. Jessica occasionally interjected with questions about how we'd met or comments about how noble Brandon's profession was, her tone suggesting she was talking about a character in a children's book rather than the man beside me. "I've always admired firefighters," she said, swirling her wine. "Such a selfless choice, though I imagine the schedule must be difficult for maintaining a normal life." Brandon smiled politely. "We make it work. Madison understands the demands of the job, and I respect her career just as much." Throughout this exchange, Brandon maintained his composure, his hand occasionally finding mine when my mother's questions grew particularly pointed. He answered honestly but never defensively, refusing to be baited into justifying his life choices. As we moved to the dining room, I gasped despite myself. The table was a showcase of my mother's talents: Wedgwood china on a damask tablecloth, crystal glasses catching the light from the antique chandelier, an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers and gourds, place cards positioned as strategically, Jessica and Thomas near the head of the table where my parents sat, Michael next to them, and Brandon and me relegated to the far end, as if our relationship might contaminate the family if seated too close. Mother had even used her second-best china for our settings, a detail that wouldn't be noticed by anyone but me. It was these small cutting choices that had been the soundtrack of my childhood, the message that I was second-best, always slightly less deserving. As we took our seats, I felt Brandon's questioning gaze. I gave a small shrug, trying to communicate that this was just one of my mother's power plays. He squeezed my hand under the table, a silent promise that we were in this together. My father took his place at the head of the table, my mother at the foot, and the Thanksgiving performance was about to begin. The golden turkey sat in the center of the table like a sacrifice on an altar. Steam rose from serving dishes of mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and my mother's famous sage stuffing. Everything was picture perfect, as though a food stylist had arranged each element for a magazine shoot. "Shall we say grace?" my mother suggested, though it wasn't really a question. We all bowed our heads dutifully. "Dear Lord," she began, "we thank you for this beautiful meal and for bringing our family together. We're grateful for the success and excellence you've blessed us with here." She glanced meaningfully at Jessica and Thomas, "and we pray that all of us continue to uphold the standards and values this family was built upon. Amen." The prayer, like everything else in the Reynolds household, contained its own subtle hierarchy of worth. My father carved the turkey with surgical precision, and the plates were passed. For a few minutes, there was the blessed relief of food as a distraction, compliments on the perfectly cooked bird, Jessica's commentary on the wine pairing, Michael's enthusiastic appreciation of the stuffing. "So Madison," my mother began once the initial serving was complete, "how is that marketing job of yours going? Still handling social media for restaurants?" The dismissive characterization of my career: I managed multi-million-dollar campaigns for major brands, not social media for local eateries, was typical. But today, I had actual news to share. "Actually, I was promoted to marketing director last month," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm overseeing a team of 12 now, and we just landed the Northeastern Healthcare account, which is the largest in the agency's history." There was a brief pause, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something like respect flicker in my mother's eyes. "Well, that's nice, dear," she said, the moment gone. "Jessica just won the Callahan case. It's been in all the legal journals. The youngest attorney at her firm to argue before the state Supreme Court. Jessica at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom, Madison's promotion is a big deal. That's really impressive, sis." Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "She's been working incredibly hard. The whole team took us out to celebrate. Her boss said she's on track for the executive committee in a few years." "Executive committee at a marketing agency," my mother mused, as if considering the worth of monopoly money. "I suppose that's quite an achievement in that field." "It is," I said firmly. "The marketing industry is highly competitive, and I've built my reputation through hard work and results." "Of course you have, dear," my mother replied. "You've always been creative, though I still think you could have done so well in law with the right application." And there it was, the familiar diminishment, the suggestion that my choices were somehow less valid, less impressive than the path she'd chosen for me. The conversation mercifully shifted to Michael's medical school experiences, then to Thomas's recent business trip to Tokyo. I felt myself relax slightly, grateful to be out of the spotlight. Brandon participated easily in the conversation, asking thoughtful questions about Michael's studies and showing genuine interest in my father's brief comments about a complicated surgery he's performed. As dessert approached, my mother turned the conversation to our living situation. "Madison tells me you two have moved in together," she said, her tone making it clear this was a subject of disapproval. "In Cambridge, was it?" "Yes," Brandon replied. "We found a great place near Central Square. It's convenient for both our commutes." My mother's nose wrinkled slightly. "Central Square, isn't that rather urban? There are some lovely condos in Back Bay that would be much more suitable." "We like the neighborhood," I interjected. "It's vibrant, diverse, and we can actually afford it without being house poor." "Well, I suppose at your age I shouldn't be surprised you're still renting," she sighed, as if I'd announced we were living in a van. "Actually," Brandon said, "we've been talking about buying something in the next few years. The right place at the right time." I nodded. Though we hadn't specifically discussed homeownership yet, it was a natural assumption for the future. but Brandon's mention of we in the future clearly signaled our commitment. "And what about marriage?" my mother asked bluntly. "Surely you're not planning to purchase property together without that commitment?" The table went silent. Even my father looked up from his plate. "Mom," I said quietly, "Brandon and I are committed to each other. We're building our life on our timeline, not anyone else's." "I just don't understand this generation's casual approach to traditional values," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "In my day, there was an order to things." "Times change, Mrs. Reynolds," Brandon said respectfully but firmly, "but our commitment to each other is anything but casual." Jessica, perhaps sensing the tension, attempted to change the subject. "The stuffing is exceptional this year, Mom. Did you try a new recipe?" But my mother wasn't done. "And children, is that something you're considering, or is that too traditional as well?" Something about the question, its intrusiveness, its judgment, sparked a courage in me I didn't know I possessed. "Actually," I said, meeting Brandon's eyes briefly, "we've talked about starting a family in the next couple of years." Brandon nodded, supporting me, though we'd only had preliminary conversations about children. My mother set down her fork with a sharp clink against fine china. "You're planning to have children without being married, Madison. Think about what people will say." "I don't care what people will say," I replied, surprising myself with my calm tone. "We care about building a loving home, whether that includes marriage now, later, or never." The table fell silent. My father studied his plate, Jessica exchanged glances with Thomas, and Michael looked like he wished he had popcorn for the unfolding drama. Then came the moment that would change everything. My mother's spine straightened, her eyes narrowed, and she pointed directly at me with her perfectly manicured finger. "You don't deserve a seat at this table if you're going to throw away your potential on this lifestyle," she declared, her voice glacial. "Living in some questionable neighborhood with a man whose idea of ambition is running into burning buildings, planning children out of wedlock, this is not how we raised you." The room froze. Jessica's eyes widened. Michael stopped mid-bite. My father cleared his throat but said nothing, his usual response to conflict. Thomas studied his wineglass with sudden interest. But it was Brandon's expression that caught my attention, not anger or shock, but deep concern directed at me. In that moment, I saw myself reflected in his eyes, a grown woman being spoken to like a misbehaving child, accepting treatment I would never tolerate from anyone else. And something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for 28 years, finally broke free. The silence stretched as my mother's words hung in the air. I felt a familiar burning behind my eyes, the automatic response to her disapproval that I'd spent a lifetime trying to prevent. But this time, something different was happening inside me. Instead of shame or the desperate need to defend myself, I felt a strange, calm clarity spreading through my chest. Years of emotional abuse crystallized in that moment, the constant criticism, the moving goalposts, the impossible standards. I saw with sudden clarity the pattern that had defined my life, trying to earn a seat at a table where I would never truly be welcome as myself. Without saying a word, I calmly set down my napkin, stood up, and picked up my plate and utensils. Every eye in the room followed me as I walked deliberately to the living room. I placed my dinner on the coffee table, arranged my utensils neatly, and sat down on the sofa. "Madison, what do you think you're doing?" my mother demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. I looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Creating a new table," I said simply. Brandon, without hesitation, stood and picked up his own settings. "Excuse me," he said politely to the stunned family as he joined me in the living room, setting his plate beside mine on the coffee table. "This is ridiculous," my mother sputtered. "Both of you, return to the dining room immediately." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "No, Mom, I won't sit at a table where I'm constantly told I don't measure up. I'm 28 years old, successful in my career, in a loving relationship, and I'm done trying to earn approval that's always just out of reach." My voice grew stronger as I continued. "Anyone who wants to have a respectful conversation is welcome to join us, but I'm finished with the criticism and judgment." My mother's face flushed crimson. "Richard," she appealed to my father, "say something." My father cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable, but before he could speak, a chair scraped back. To everyone's surprise, it was Michael who stood up, plate in hand. "Actually, that sounds great," he said, his usual joking manner replaced by something more solemn. He came and sat across from us, setting his plate on the coffee table. "I'm kind of tired of the dining room dynamics myself." "Michael," my mother exclaimed, "what has gotten into you all?" Michael shrugged, but his expression was serious. "I've been wanting to tell you guys something for months, but there never seemed to be a right time." He looked at me, then at Brandon. "I don't think I want to be a doctor." In the hierarchy of Reynolds family sins, this was near the top. 3 generations of physicians, a legacy my father had been determined would continue through his son. "What are you talking about?" My father finally spoke, his voice strained. "I'm miserable in med school," Michael admitted. "I've been forcing myself through it because I didn't want to disappoint you, but seeing Mads stand up just now," he smiled at me, "I think I want to go into psychology instead, maybe help people before they end up on an operating table." In the dining room, my mother was sputtering about family tradition and wasted opportunities, but in our impromptu living room gathering, something remarkable was happening, a real conversation. "How long have you been feeling this way?" asked Michael. "Pretty much since day one," he admitted. "I almost failed anatomy last semester because I couldn't make myself study, but I keep thinking about how much I enjoyed my psychology undergrad courses." Brandon nodded. "I've seen that a lot in my profession. People doing jobs that are killing them inside because they're afraid to disappoint someone else." We continued eating and talking, ignoring my mother's increasingly strained demands that we return to the dining room. For perhaps the first time, Michael and I were having a genuine conversation about our lives, our fears, and our hopes. About 10 minutes into this unprecedented family rebellion, Jessica appeared at the edge of the living room, looking torn. She glanced back at the dining room, then at our small gathering. "Is there room for one more?" she asked quietly. I nodded, genuinely surprised. Jessica had always been the perfect daughter, the one who followed all the rules and reaped all the rewards. She settled into an armchair, balancing her plate on her lap. "I didn't know you were unhappy in med school, Mike," she said. "You should have told me." Michael shrugged. "Would you have understood? You've always done everything right." Jessica's laugh held a note of bitterness I'd never heard before. "Right according to Mom's definition." She looked down at her plate. "My marriage is struggling," she admitted. "Thomas and I are in counseling. He works 80 hours a week, and when he is home, we have nothing to talk about except appearances we need to maintain." "Jess, I had no idea," I said, reaching out to touch her hand. "How could you? We never talk about real things in this family." She turned to Brandon. "I'm sorry for how we've all acted today. And Madison, your promotion is genuinely impressive. I've always admired how you forged your own path." The revelation stunned me. "You have? But you always seemed so convinced that your way was the only right way." "Because that's what I needed to believe to keep doing it," she admitted. "Watching you break away was terrifying because it forced me to question my own choices." From the dining room, we could hear my mother's voice rising as she berated my father for his lack of control over the situation. He mumbled responses too low to hear clearly. Our living room conversation continued, transforming into something I'd never experienced with my siblings' authenticity. Michael talked about his passion for understanding human behavior. Jessica admitted the crushing pressure she felt to maintain her perfect life facade. I shared stories about my marketing projects, and Brandon told us about a community outreach program he'd started for kids interested in firefighting. Then the doorbell rang. We all looked up, confused. My mother's voice cut off mid-sentence. Footsteps crossed the foyer, and we heard the front door open. "Hello, sorry we're late," came an unfamiliar female voice. "We brought pumpkin pie and Brandon said we should just come right in." Brandon stood up, a smile spreading across his face. "Right on time," he said softly to me before raising his voice. "We're in the living room, Mom." My jaw dropped as Brandon's parents, Linda and Robert Wilson, appeared in the doorway, bearing desserts and warm smiles. Linda, a petite woman with Brandon's kind eyes, and Robert, tall with salt and pepper hair and his son's easy manner, took in the unusual dining arrangement without missing a beat. "We're having an alternative Thanksgiving," Brandon explained, hugging his parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Madison's family. Her brother Michael, sister Jessica, and her parents are in the dining room." "What is the meaning of this?" My mother appeared behind them, looking as though she might combust from the breach in protocol. "Brandon, you didn't mention additional guests." "I wanted to surprise everyone," Brandon said smoothly. "My parents were having a quiet Thanksgiving, and I thought, what better way to celebrate than bringing our families together? They were planning to just come for dessert." Linda stepped forward, extending a homemade pie to my mother. "Catherine Wright, it's so lovely to meet you. Brandon has told us wonderful things about Madison's family. We've been dying to meet everyone." My mother, trapped by social convention, had no choice but to accept the pie and introduce herself properly. My father emerged from the dining room, looking relieved at the interruption of the family drama. Linda turned to our coffee table gathering. "Oh, how cozy. Is this where the party is?" Before my mother could object, Linda and Robert had settled into our living room circle, Robert pulling over an ottoman, Linda perching on the arm of Brandon's chair. Now, which one of you is Michael, the future doctor? Linda asked, her warmth immediately drawing my brother out. Actually, I might be switching to psychology, he admitted. No kidding, Robert exclaimed. My brother's a psychologist. Best decision he ever made after starting out in pre-med. Couldn't be happier. The easy acceptance in his voice, the idea that changing course wasn't a catastrophic failure but potentially a better path, seemed to lift a weight from Michael's shoulders. What happened next was remarkable. Brandon's parents, with their genuine interest and lack of pretension, created a space where conversation flowed naturally. They asked Jessica about her legal work with actual curiosity, not as a measuring stick. They drew my father into a discussion about his favorite fishing spots after discovering a shared hobby. They complimented my mother's beautiful home without the competitive edge that usually accompanied such comments among her peers. The contrast between family dynamics couldn't have been more stark. The Wilsons related to each other and to us with affection that didn't need to be earned, with respect that wasn't contingent on achievement. They disagreed openly but kindly, teased without wounding, and really listened to each other. My mother remained stiff at first, clearly thrown by both the rebellion and these unexpected guests who didn't fit her carefully planned evening, but even she couldn't maintain her icy demeanor in the face of Linda's genuine warmth. By the time we moved to dessert, she had joined us in the living room, perched uncomfortably on the edge of an armchair, but present nonetheless. The new table I had created, born of desperation and courage, had somehow expanded to include everyone, even her. It wasn't perfect or polished, but it was real in a way the dining room table had never been. As Brandon squeezed my hand, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking a place at my mother's table. I had created my own and found the strength to invite others to join me on my terms. The remainder of the evening unfolded in a strange new reality. Brandon's parents chatted easily with everyone, filling the awkward gaps with genuine questions and warmth. They shared stories about Brandon as a child, his determination to save every injured animal in the neighborhood, his first time sliding down a fire pole during a station visit at age 7. These glimpses into Brandon's life humanized him in a way my family couldn't dismiss. Around 9, Linda and Robert prepared to leave, thanking my mother profusely for her hospitality, a gracious fiction we all tacitly accepted. As Brandon walked his parents to the door, my mother retreated to the kitchen, my father trailing behind her. The sounds of hushed but intense conversation drifted out. Jessica, Michael, and I remained in the living room, the three of us alone together in a way that felt unprecedented. So Michael said, breaking the silence. That was revolutionary, Jessica finished, a small smile playing at her lips. I can't believe you did that, Mads. I shrugged, still processing the evening myself. I just couldn't do it anymore. Pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. I've wanted to tell them about med school for months, Michael admitted, just never had the guts. And I've been hiding problems in my marriage for over a year, Jessica added quietly. Thomas and I barely speak anymore unless we're at events like this, performing for an audience. This vulnerable admission from my seemingly perfect sister stunned me. Jess, I had no idea. You always make everything look so effortless. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's the family specialty, isn't it? Looking perfect while falling apart inside. She twisted her wedding ring absently. Thomas works constantly. When he is home, he's on his phone or criticizing something. The way I load the dishwasher, the way I dress, the way I speak at his company events. I'm exhausted from trying to be perfect. Why do you stay? Michael asked, the directness that had always been his gift cutting through pretense. Jessica blinked rapidly, fighting tears, because leaving would mean failing, and Reynolds don't fail, right? The three of us sat with that thought, the weight of our family legacy pressing down on different parts of each of us. Brandon returned, sensing the heavy mood. Everything okay? Before I could answer, my mother emerged from the kitchen, my father behind her. Her face was composed, but I could see the strain around her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands. I believe we need to discuss what happened at dinner, she said, her voice tight. I took a deep breath, feeling Brandon's solid presence beside me. Yes, I think we do. What followed was the most honest conversation our family had ever had. Words that had been bottled up for decades finally found release. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Nothing I've done has ever been good enough. Not my grades, not my career, not my relationships. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? That's not true, my mother protested. I've always wanted what's best for you. What you think is best, I corrected, not what actually makes me happy or fulfilled. We sacrificed everything to give you children advantages, she countered. The best schools, the best opportunities. Is it wrong to expect you to make the most of them? Making the most of them doesn't have to mean following the exact path you laid out, Michael interjected. I'm good at science, but I hate med school. I wake up every morning dreading the day ahead. That's not a recipe for becoming a good doctor. My father, who had been characteristically silent, finally spoke. Michael, medicine is a noble profession. Our family has. I know, Dad, 3 generations of Reynolds surgeons, Michael finished, but I'm not you. I want to help people in a different way. And what about your marriage, Jessica? My mother turned to her perfect daughter, voice sharp with accusation. Is that failing too? Jessica flinched as if slapped. We're trying to work through our issues, but yes, we're struggling, and I've been afraid to tell you because I knew you'd see it as just another disappointment. That's not fair, my mother insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked quietly. When have you ever responded to any of us changing course with anything but criticism? My father ran a hand through his thinning hair. Your mother wants what's best for this family. She's dedicated her life to creating opportunities for you all. And we're grateful, I acknowledged. But at some point you have to let us be adults who make our own choices. You have to love us for who we are, not who you wanted us to be. Brandon, who had remained respectfully quiet during this family confrontation, finally spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I love your daughter. She's brilliant, kind, and incredibly talented at what she does. I see how these family dynamics hurt her, and I need you to know that I'll support her whether you approve of us or not. My mother's expression tightened. Young man, you've been in Madison's life for what, a few months? We've been her parents for 28 years. And in those 28 years, have you ever really seen her? Brandon asked gently, because I saw her clearly from the first day we met. The question hung in the air, uncomfortable but necessary. After a long moment, my father surprised us all by saying, No, I don't think we have. He looked at me with sad eyes. I've been so focused on my work, on upholding some idea of what our family should be, that I missed what was happening right in front of me. I failed you kids, not the other way around. My mother stared at him, shock evident on her face. Richard. It's true, Catherine, he said firmly. We've been so fixated on appearances that we've damaged our relationships with our children. Is that the legacy we want to leave? For the first time in my memory, my mother seemed at a loss for words. Her carefully constructed reality was crumbling, and she had no script for this situation. I stood up, Brandon rising beside me. We're going to head out now. It's been a long day for everyone. You're not staying the night. My mother's voice held a note of panic, as if our leaving would somehow make permanent the shift that had occurred. Not tonight, I said gently. We need some space, but this conversation isn't over. It's just beginning. Michael and Jessica both hugged me tightly before we left, whispering thanks and promises to call soon. My father embraced me with unusual emotion, whispering, I'm proud of you, Madison, in my ear. My mother remained stiff when I hugged her goodbye, but I felt a slight tremor in her shoulders that might have been a suppressed sob. The drive back to our apartment was quiet, both of us processing the seismic events of the day. When we finally arrived home, our modest but warm apartment that my mother had so casually dismissed, I felt the emotional weight of the day crash over me. I can't believe I did that, I whispered, sinking onto our sofa. 28 years of keeping the peace, and I just broke the whole system. Brandon sat beside me, pulling me into his arms. You were magnificent. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. Your parents were amazing, I said, showing up like that. Was that planned? He smiled sheepishly. I might have suggested they come for dessert as a backup plan. I didn't know if we'd need reinforcements, but I wanted them nearby just in case. It was perfect, I said, leaning against his shoulder. The contrast between our families couldn't have been clearer. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. That was a lot of emotional heavy lifting. I considered the question carefully. I think I am. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe around my family, like I don't have to make myself smaller to fit their idea of who I should be. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Michael. Crashed at a friend's place. Couldn't handle the post-game analysis. Proud of you, sis. Call you tomorrow. Then another message, this one from Jessica Thomas, and I just had the most honest conversation of our marriage. Thank you for your courage today. It's contagious. I showed the messages to Brandon, tears welling in my eyes. Something really changed today, didn't it? You changed it, he said simply. You stood up and created a new table. The next morning I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Michael, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to say thank you again, he said without preamble. I called the dean of students this morning and made an appointment to discuss transferring to the psychology program. That's huge, Mike, I said, sitting up in bed. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, free. He paused. Mom and Dad are going to freak out when I tell them officially. Maybe, I acknowledged, but they'll adjust, and if they don't, you've got me and Jess in your corner now. That's the thing, isn't it? Michael said thoughtfully. For the first time, it feels like we're actually siblings, not just competitors in some weird family Olympics. After we hung up, I lay back in bed, Brandon still sleeping peacefully beside me. The journey ahead with my family would be complicated, with setbacks and old patterns reasserting themselves, but something fundamental had shifted. I had found my voice, and in doing so, had somehow given my siblings permission to find theirs as well. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen putting finishing touches on the appetizers while Brandon opened wine. Christmas music played softly in the background, and the small tree we'd decorated together twinkled in our living room corner. Our apartment, now adorned with family photos, plants, and art we'd collected together, felt like the home I'd always wanted but never quite had. "They're here," Brandon called from the window where he'd been watching for arrivals. "Your parents just pulled up." I took a deep breath, centering myself. So much had changed in the year since that fateful Thanksgiving. The journey hadn't been easy or linear, but it had been transformative in ways I never could have imagined. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I'd received a call from my father, asking if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, at a small cafe halfway between his hospital and my office. He'd done something unprecedented. He'd apologized. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his hands wrapped around his mug, "about the kind of father I've been, the kind of husband, too." He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper. "I failed you, Madison. I let your mother set the tone for our family, and I retreated into my work rather than dealing with the problems right in front of me." That conversation had been the first of many. My father had announced his retirement from surgery 3 months later, a decision that shocked everyone. "I've missed too much already," he told me. "I don't want to miss whatever comes next." My mother's journey had been more complicated. Initially, she's retreated into rigid denial, doubling down on her controlling behavior. But when Michael officially transferred to the psychology program and Jessica began therapy, both without seeking her approval first, something had begun to crack in her carefully constructed world. The turning point came when she reluctantly agreed to attend family therapy sessions. Initially, I suspected, to prove to the therapist that she was right and the rest of us were being unreasonable. Dr. Patel, however, was skilled at navigating family dynamics. Under her guidance, we began unpacking decades of patterns. In our third session, my mother broke down crying, something I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life. My own mother, she'd revealed through tears, criticized everything I did. Nothing was ever good enough. I swore I wouldn't be like her, but her voice had trailed off as the realization hit her. Learning about this intergenerational pattern didn't instantly fix our relationship, but it helped me understand her better. My mother had been trying to protect us from the criticism she'd faced, believing that if she pushed us to be perfect, the world couldn't hurt us. Her intentions, misguided as they were, had come from love, a distorted, damaged version of it, but love nonetheless. In my professional life, I'd continued to thrive, earning a place on the executive committee 6 months ahead of schedule. When I called my mother with the news, her response had surprised me. "I'm proud of you, Madison," she said, her voice warm. "You've built something meaningful on your own terms." The compliment, freely given without comparison or qualification, had nearly brought me to tears. Brandon and I had gotten engaged 3 months ago, a simple, heartfelt proposal during a weekend hike to a waterfall. When we'd announced it at a family dinner, my mother had hugged me tightly. "He's a good man," she'd whispered in my ear. "I was wrong about him, about so many things." Jessica's marriage to Thomas had ended amicably in the spring. The separation had initially horrified my mother, but when she saw how much happier Jessica was on her own, pursuing pro bono work that had always been her passion, even she had to admit it was for the best. Michael was flourishing in the psychology program, his grades and enthusiasm reflecting his genuine calling. He'd started dating a fellow student named Rachel, who would be joining us for dinner tonight. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my reflections. Brandon squeezed my hand reassuringly before going to answer it. My parents entered first, my father carrying a bouquet of flowers, my mother balancing a perfectly wrapped gift and a homemade pie. She'd started baking as a form of therapy, finding joy in creating rather than controlling. Behind them came Michael and Rachel, followed by Jessica, who'd brought her new friend Claire from the legal aid office. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," my mother said, embracing me warmly. She looked different, softer somehow, her hair longer and less severely styled, her clothing more relaxed. The apartment looks beautiful. Thanks, Mom, I said, accepting the compliment without searching for the hidden criticism. I'm so glad you all could come. As everyone settled in, bringing dishes to the table, chatting easily, I felt Brandon's arm slip around my waist. Look at that, he murmured, nodding toward the scene, your new table. And it was true, the gathering before us bore little resemblance to the stiff hierarchical dinners of my childhood. My father was laughing at something Michael's girlfriend had said. Jessica and Claire were animatedly discussing a case they were working on. My mother was actually listening to Brandon's story about his recent promotion to lieutenant, asking genuine questions about his work. The table I'd created in desperation that Thanksgiving Day had become something real and lasting, a place where authenticity was valued over perfection, where connection mattered more than achievement, where love wasn't something to be earned but freely given. When we finally sat down to dinner, there was no formal blessing extolling family excellence, no strategic seating arrangement designed to reinforce status. Instead, my father raised his glass in a simple toast. To family, he said, his eyes meeting mine with genuine warmth, the one we were born into and the one we choose to create. My mother reached for my hand across the table, and to Madison she added, her voice thick with emotion, who had the courage to show us a better way to be together. Later, after dessert had been served and presents exchanged, I found myself in the kitchen with my mother washing dishes side by side. I've been thinking about last Thanksgiving a lot, she said quietly, handing me a plate to dry. Me too, I admitted. I was so angry when you got up from the table, she confessed. I thought you were being disrespectful, rebellious. I was just trying to protect myself, I said, to create a boundary. She nodded slowly. I know that now. It's taken me a long time and a lot of therapy to understand. When you said I'd never seen you, really seen you, she paused, blinking back tears. You were right. I was so focused on who I thought you should be that I missed who you actually are. I'm so sorry, Madison. I set down the dish towel and hugged her tightly. I'm proud of how far we've come, Mom, all of us. Me too, she whispered. We rejoined the others in the living room, where Brandon was showing my father photos from our recent weekend trip to Maine. Jessica and Claire were helping Michael and Rachel hang Christmas lights around the windows. The scene was warm, relaxed, imperfect in all the right ways. Brandon caught my eye across the room, his smile carrying a question. I nodded slightly, and he stood up, gently tapping his glass to get everyone's attention. Madison and I have an announcement, he said, moving to stand beside me. We've set a date for the wedding, May 15th, next spring. Excited congratulations erupted around us, my mother's eyes filled with happy tears. And I added, my heart full, we're hoping to start a family soon after. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, joy replacing what once would have been judgment. I'm going to be a grandmother, she whispered, wonderment in her voice. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were said, I found myself standing in the doorway with Brandon, watching my family depart, all of them hugging each other, making plans to meet again soon, connected in a way I'd once thought impossible. You did that, Brandon said softly, echoing his words from a year ago. You created this. I leaned against him, grateful beyond words for his steady presence through all the changes. We did it together. The journey of healing wasn't complete. Family transformation is never finished in a single moment or even a single year. There would still be difficult conversations, old habits reasserting themselves, new boundaries to establish, but we had begun. We had created a new table, one with room for everyone, one built on love rather than performance. As I closed the door on that Christmas gathering, I thought about all the people watching this who might be struggling with their own family dynamics, their own impossible standards, their own fears of speaking up and setting boundaries. If you're one of those people, I want you to know that change is possible. It isn't easy and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage to stand up, to create your own table when the one you've been given doesn't nourish you. But on the other side of that courage is a freedom I never thought possible. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? How did it change your relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more about my ongoing journey with family healing. Remember, you deserve a seat at a table that celebrates who you truly are, and sometimes you have to be the one to build it. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own path to authentic connection.